Darkness falls, the crucifixion that changed history. Jerusalem, 33 AD. The air hung heavy with dust and anticipation, as crowds gathered on a hill outside the city walls known as Golgotha, the place of the skull. The name itself was ominous, whispering of death and despair. This wasn't just any day in ancient Jerusalem. This was a day that would split history in two, though few present could comprehend the cosmic significance unfolding before their eyes. The crowd was a tapestry of humanity. Roman soldiers standing at attention with cold indifference, Jewish religious leaders with thinly veiled satisfaction, curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle, and a small cluster of devastated followers keeping their distance, their hearts breaking with each passing moment. Their voices created a discordant symphony of whispers, jeers, and quiet sobs that rose and fell like waves against the rocky hillside. Among them stood a young Roman soldier on his first execution duty. His armor gleamed in the midday sun, but his eyes betrayed his unease. He had seen death before, but something about this particular condemned man unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. For centuries, the Jewish people had awaited this moment, the arrival of their Messiah, the promised deliverer who would restore their nation to glory. Prophets had written of his coming. Generations had prayed for it. Mothers had whispered to their children that one day a king would arise to save them. But no one had expected this. They had envisioned a warrior king like David, who would overthrow their Roman oppressors with might and power, a ruler who would sit on a physical throne and restore the kingdom of Israel to its former glory. Instead, they got Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter's son who spoke of a kingdom not of this world, who touched lepers, ate with sinners, and challenged the very religious authorities who claimed to represent God. This profound disconnect between expectation and reality created the first crack in understanding. The Messiah they wanted was not the Messiah they needed. Jesus hadn't come to overthrow Rome, but to defeat enemies far more insidious and universal, sin and death themselves. Not to save a nation, but to redeem humanity. Now this supposed Messiah was being led up the hill, stumbling under the weight of the wooden crossbeam. His back was torn open from the Roman flagrum, a whip embedded with bone and metal that shredded flesh with each stroke. A crown of thorns had been pressed into his head, blood trickling down his face in a grotesque parody of royal anointment. The process of crucifixion was designed not just to kill, but to humiliate, to strip away dignity along with life. The Romans had perfected it as both execution and warning. This is what happens to those who challenge our authority. The condemned were typically nailed naked to the cross, displayed at eye level so passers-by could mock them as they slowly suffocated. The sound of the hammer striking nails through flesh and into wood echoed across Golgotha. Each strike resonated through the crowd, causing some to wince and others to cheer. For Jesus' followers, each blow must have felt like it was driving through their own hearts. Yet in this moment of extreme agony, Jesus spoke words that defied human understanding. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The crowd fell momentarily silent. This was not the bitter curse expected from a dying man, not a plea for mercy or a cry of pain. Instead, he offered forgiveness to his executioners. The young Roman soldier's hand trembled slightly on his spear. The religious leaders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Who forgives their killers? What kind of man prays for those driving nails through his limbs? As the cross was lifted and dropped into its socket with a sickening thud, Jesus gasped in pain as his full weight pulled against the nails. Crucifixion was designed to maximize suffering, the victim's weight making it increasingly difficult to breathe, requiring them to push up on their nailed feet to take each agonizing breath. The crowds continued their taunts. "He saved others, but he can't save himself. If you're the Son of God, come down from that cross." Their mockery hung in the air like the dust stirred up by their sandals. 3 hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the condemned men. Then something extraordinary began to happen. It started subtly, a dimming of light that might initially be mistaken for a passing cloud. But there were no clouds in the clear April sky. The darkness deepened rapidly, not like the gradual onset of evening, but as if an invisible hand were turning down the brightness of the universe itself. Within minutes, an unnatural night had fallen at midday. This wasn't the darkness of an eclipse, which lasts mere minutes. This was something else entirely. A profound, unsettling blackness that would persist for 3 full hours. Conversation died away as confusion and fear spread through the crowd. Some began to leave, stumbling down the hill in the unexpected darkness. Others huddled together, whispering of omens and divine judgment. The Roman soldiers shifted uneasily, their discipline wavering in the face of something their training hadn't prepared them for. In the sudden darkness, the sounds intensified, the labored breathing of the dying men, the whispers of the crowd, the distant bleating of sheep being prepared for Passover sacrifice in the temple. The air grew still and heavy, as if creation itself were holding its breath, watching and waiting. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It felt oppressive, almost tangible, pressing down upon everyone present. It was as if a veil had been drawn across the sun, not just blocking its light, but signaling that something had fundamentally shifted in the very fabric of reality. Those who knew the ancient prophecies might have recalled the words of Amos written centuries before. "In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight." What had been a mysterious prediction was now unfolding before their eyes. As the darkness enveloped Golgotha, it brought with it questions that would echo through the centuries. What was happening? Why did the light of day flee at this particular moment? Was this merely a strange coincidence, or was something far more profound taking place? Something that would forever alter the relationship between humanity and the divine. The meaning of darkness. Prophecy fulfilled. The darkness that descended upon Golgotha was not merely a meteorological anomaly. It was the physical manifestation of ancient prophecy unfolding before the eyes of those present. Centuries earlier, the prophet Amos had written words that had mystified generations of scholars. "In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight." Amos 8:9. These words, preserved in sacred scripture, had awaited their fulfillment, a divine promise suspended in time until this precise moment. Similarly, the prophet Joel had foretold, "The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." Joel 2:31. What had been cryptic poetry was now terrifying reality. The darkness wasn't random. It was appointed, predestined, written into the divine narrative long before this hill became the stage for its fulfillment. For those with eyes to see, the prophecies were being unveiled in a way no one had anticipated. The religious leaders who prided themselves on knowing every letter of Scripture stood beneath the fulfillment of prophecy, yet failed to recognize it. Their blindness was both literal in the descending darkness and spiritual in their inability to see who hung before them. The supreme irony hung heavy in the air. Jesus had repeatedly identified himself as the light of the world, declaring, "Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." John 8:12. Yet now, at the culmination of his earthly mission, darkness had swallowed the light. The one who had come to illuminate humanity's path was being extinguished in darkness, so profound it seemed to swallow the sun itself. This paradox, light experiencing darkness, contained a mystery beyond human comprehension. It was as if all the darkness of human sin was converging upon the one being in the universe, who was its complete opposite. The perfect meeting of opposites, holiness encountering sin, light absorbing darkness, life embracing death. Standing at the foot of the cross, Longinus, the Roman centurion overseeing the execution, felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. A veteran of many crucifixions, he had never witnessed anything like this. Roman historical accounts would later record that he whispered to his fellow soldier, "Perhaps this man truly was the Son of God." The darkness was changing him, working its effect even on the hardened agent of Rome. Near the edge of the crowd, Nicodemus, a Pharisee who had once visited Jesus by night, now watched another kind of night descend at midday. The symmetry was not lost on him. He had approached Jesus in darkness out of fear of his colleagues. Now darkness approached them all as those same colleagues achieved their goal of eliminating Jesus. Clutching his scrolls containing the prophecies, Nicodemus felt the weight of realization crushing his chest. For the Jewish people, darkness carried profound theological significance. At creation, darkness had covered the formless earth until God commanded, "Let there be light." During the Exodus, darkness had plagued Egypt, while the Israelites dwelled in light. In their tradition, darkness symbolized judgment, chaos, and separation from God. Now, as darkness fell on their holy city during Passover, the cosmic implications were inescapable. Josephus, who would later document this era, would include accounts of this mysterious darkness. The Greek historian Thales would reference it in his histories. Even beyond Jerusalem, it appeared the event registered in distant lands. Decades later, Phlegon of Tralles would write, "In the 4th year of the 22nd Olympiad, there was an eclipse of the sun greater than any previously known, and night came on at the 6th hour of the day, so that stars were seen in the sky." But this was no ordinary eclipse. Astronomical impossibility aside, Passover occurring at full moon when solar eclipses cannot happen, the duration defied natural explanation. Nature itself seemed to be testifying that what was occurring transcended natural law. Among the terrified onlookers was a wealthy merchant who had traveled from Alexandria. Well-versed in both Greek philosophy and Jewish theology, he found himself trapped between rationality and revelation. His logical mind sought a natural explanation, perhaps unusual atmospheric conditions or a sandstorm. Yet his spiritual intuition recognized something more profound. In later years, he would become a devoted follower of the Way, often recounting how the inexplicable darkness had first cracked open his heart to possibilities beyond reason. The young mother clutched her child to her breast, whispering ancient prayers for protection. She had brought her son to witness the execution as a stern warning against challenging authority. Now, as unnatural night surrounded them, she questioned her judgment, not just in bringing her child, but in supporting this execution. The darkness was accomplishing something the daylight could not, forcing everyone present to confront their own inner darkness. In Jewish apocalyptic literature, darkness before the day of the Lord was understood as the precursor to divine intervention. The darkness at Golgotha wasn't merely symbolic, it was an announcement. Heaven was declaring that this was no ordinary execution, and this was no ordinary man. The darkness served multiple purposes in the divine narrative. It was judgment visualized, sin's consequence made tangible. It was protection, shielding the sacred moment of redemption from public spectacle. It was demarcation, signaling that what transpired during these hours would forever divide history. For those who had followed Jesus, who had heard him predict his death and resurrection, the darkness confirmed the supernatural nature of what was unfolding. Though terrified and grief-stricken, they could sense that this darkness was not the end of the story, but part of a greater narrative still being written. As the eerie stillness continued, each person on that hill was left alone with their thoughts, their assumptions challenged, their beliefs questioned. In the absence of light, with visual distractions removed, the darkness forced an interior reckoning. Positions of power suddenly seemed meaningless. Religious certainty wavered. The boundaries between accusers and defenders, Romans and Jews, righteous and sinners, all blurred in the equalizing darkness. The cosmos itself had become a witness. The darkness testified that what happened on that crude wooden cross reached far beyond a local execution in a troubled Roman province. Something universe-altering was taking place, an event so momentous that creation itself could not remain unmoved. The sun that God had placed in the sky to give light to the world was now hidden, as if unable to bear witness to what humanity was doing to its Creator. Divine loneliness, the ultimate sacrifice. For 3 hours the darkness persisted, and an eerie silence blanketed Golgotha. Then, without warning, that silence was shattered by a cry so raw and agonizing that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of the darkness itself. A voice, once commanding enough to calm storms and raise the dead, now strained with unfathomable anguish. Eli, lama sabachthani. The Aramaic words echoed across the hill before being translated by some in the crowd for those who didn't understand. My God, why have you forsaken me? This was not merely a man's cry of physical agony, though the pain of crucifixion was beyond description. This was something far deeper, a soul cry that revealed the true cost of what was happening upon that cross. For the first time in all eternity, the perfect communion between Father and Son was ruptured. The unbreakable bond that had existed before the foundation of the world was experiencing something previously inconceivable: separation. To comprehend the magnitude of this moment requires understanding the relationship that was being severed. Unlike human relationships that begin at a point in time, the relationship between father and son had no beginning. It was eternal, perfect, complete. Their unity was not just close, it was fundamental to their very being. "I and the Father are one," Jesus had declared. This was not poetic language but essential truth. Now, as Jesus hung between heaven and earth, that perfect unity was experiencing unprecedented disruption. The Son, who had always enjoyed unbroken fellowship with the Father, was tasting the bitterness of abandonment. Why such separation? Scripture provides the answer with stark clarity. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, 2 Corinthians 5:21. At this crucial moment, Jesus wasn't merely being punished for sin, he was becoming the embodiment of all human sin. The spotless Lamb who had lived in perfect obedience was now taking upon himself the fullness of human rebellion against God. And since sin, by its very nature, creates separation from the holy God who cannot look upon evil, Jesus experienced the ultimate consequence of sin: abandonment by God. The darkness covering the land was the visible manifestation of this spiritual reality. As Jesus bore sin, the Father turned away, not from his Son whom he loved, but from the sin his Son had become. To grasp the emotional intensity of this moment, consider a mother who sees her child trapped in a burning building. Without hesitation, she rushes into the flames to save her child, knowing she may not survive. What drives such sacrifice? A love so profound that separation is more unbearable than death itself. Now magnify that love to divine proportions, the love that binds the Trinity, and begin to glimpse what it meant for that bond to be broken, even momentarily. Or imagine a father who gives his own vital organ to save his dying child, knowing he will not survive the procedure. The physical pain is real, but it pales compared to the love that makes such a choice not just possible, but inevitable. Yet even this inadequately illustrates the sacrifice at Golgotha, for the separation Jesus experienced was not physical but spiritual. The very core of his being was experiencing what it meant to be cut off from the source of life. Humans understand abandonment in limited ways: a child lost in a crowded mall, a spouse who walks away after decades of marriage, a friend who disappears when needed most. These moments give us small windows into what Jesus experienced, but they are mere shadows of the cosmic abandonment that took place on the cross. For every person who has ever cried out, "God, where are you?" in moments of despair, Jesus' cry resonates across time. He entered into humanity's darkest experience, the feeling that God is absent, silent, or indifferent. The light of the world voluntarily descended into our darkness to lead us out. The spiritual darkness Jesus endured was infinitely worse than the physical darkness covering the land. It was the darkness of divine absence, of experiencing as our substitute what it means to be utterly separated from God. This was hell itself, not a place of physical torment, but the condition of complete separation from the source of all goodness, love, and life. While this divine abandonment unfolded on Golgotha, another remarkable event was taking place 2 kilometers away in the Jerusalem temple. The massive curtains separating the holy place from the most holy place, a hand-breadth thick veil that stood 60 feet high and 30 feet wide, was being torn from top to bottom. This was no minor detail. For centuries, that curtain had symbolized the separation between God and humanity. Only the high priest could venture beyond it, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement, carrying blood from the sacrifice. Now, as Jesus became the final sacrifice, that veil was supernaturally torn from top to bottom. The direction emphasizing this was God's action, not man's. The message was unmistakable. The separation was ending. Through Jesus' abandonment, the way into God's presence was being permanently opened. He was forsaken so we would never have to be. He endured separation so we could experience unhindered communion with God. Back on Golgotha, Jesus' cry of abandonment revealed another profound truth, that he remained faithful even in his darkest moment. Notice that despite feeling forsaken, he still called out, my God, my God." Even when the Father turned away, the Son's faith did not falter. His cry wasn't random, but was quoting Psalm 22, which begins in abandonment but ends in triumph. This cry pulls back the curtain on the costliest aspect of our redemption. The physical torture of crucifixion was horrendous, but the spiritual anguish of separation from the Father was the true sacrifice. Physical death paled in comparison to experiencing, even briefly, the spiritual death of divine abandonment. For anyone who has walked through the valley of spiritual darkness, questioning God's presence, wrestling with doubt, feeling abandoned in their pain, Jesus' cry offers profound solidarity. He is not a distant deity unfamiliar with human suffering. He has plumbed the depths of our darkest experiences. The mysterious paradox of Good Friday is that God himself experienced God-forsakenness. When we feel most alone, most abandoned, we can remember this truth. There is no darkness we can experience that Christ has not already endured. The darkness that covered the land for those 3 hours was a visible manifestation of the far deeper darkness Jesus willingly entered for our sake. This abandonment was part of the divine exchange. Jesus was forsaken so we could be accepted. He was rejected so we could be embraced. He entered our darkness so we could dwell in his light. Everything we deserved as rebellious creatures fell upon the innocent Creator. The perfect Son experienced the Father's rejection so that we, the disobedient children, could experience the Father's welcome. The cry of abandonment also reveals something profound about sin, that its most devastating consequence is not physical suffering or even death, but separation from God. This is why Jesus, who had endured flogging, thorns, and nails with remarkable composure, finally cried out when he experienced this separation. The physical could be borne. The spiritual separation was the true agony. In that moment of divine loneliness, the greatest act of love in cosmic history was being consummated. Love is measured by what it's willing to give up, what it's willing to endure. By that standard, no greater love has ever existed than what was displayed on that cross. The willingness of both Father and Son to endure temporary separation from each other, for the sake of those who had rejected them both. From darkness to light, the cosmic turning point. After 3 hours of impenetrable darkness, Jesus' voice cut through the black veil once more. Unlike his previous cry of abandonment, these words carried a different tone, not of questioning, but of completion and triumph. It is finished. The Greek word used in historical accounts, tetelestai, was no mere announcement that his suffering was ending. This was a declaration of victory, a pronouncement that the mission had been accomplished. In the commercial language of the time, tetelestai was written across debt documents when they were fully paid. The debt of human sin had been satisfied, the price completely paid. As the words left his lips, Jesus bowed his head and willingly released his spirit. This was no passive death. It was a sovereign act. "No one takes my life from me," he had previously declared. "I lay it down of my own accord." Even in death, he remained in control, choosing the moment of his departure. What happened next defied all natural explanation. The darkness that had smothered Jerusalem for 3 hours suddenly began to recede. It didn't fade gradually like twilight giving way to night. It withdrew, almost as if being pulled back by an unseen hand. The sun's rays broke through, revealing the grim scene on Golgotha with stark clarity. But light wasn't the only force returning to the land. The earth itself convulsed in what witnesses described as a violent earthquake. The rocky ground beneath Golgotha shook with such force that Roman soldiers, men trained to remain composed in battle, staggered to maintain their footing. The tremors radiated outward from the cross, as if creation itself was responding to the death of its creator. The centurion, who had witnessed countless deaths, now witnessed something unprecedented. Looking up at the lifeless form on the center cross, he uttered words that would have been treason in the ears of Rome. Surely this man was the Son of God. The hardened soldier, representative of the world's greatest military power, became the first to confess what many would later come to believe, that the executed criminal was actually divine. Across Jerusalem, the earthquake's effects multiplied. Within the temple, not only had the massive curtain been torn from top to bottom, but the very foundations of the sacred building shook. Priests preparing for the evening sacrifice found themselves clutching the altar for stability, their carefully maintained rituals disrupted by forces beyond their control. But perhaps the most astonishing consequence, recorded by witnesses and later documented by Matthew, was what happened in the city's burial grounds. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Imagine the scene: the stone doors of tombs dislodged by the earthquake, and within them, signs of life where there should be only decay. Though these resurrected ones would not fully emerge until after Jesus' own resurrection, the breaking open of graves signaled that death's dominion was cracking. The ultimate enemy of humanity was beginning to lose its grip. The transition from darkness to light revealed contrasting reactions among those present. The religious leaders who had been so confident in the daylight now appeared shaken. Some beat their breasts, a sign of mourning and contrition, and hurried back to the city. Their victory suddenly tasted like ash in their mouths. By contrast, those who had loved Jesus and stood by him through his suffering found mysterious hope kindling as light returned. Though grief-stricken, something in the way the darkness fled and the earth responded suggested this was not a final defeat. Mary Magdalene, from whom Jesus had cast out 7 demons, felt a familiar stirring in her spirit, the same sense of liberation she had experienced when darkness had been driven from her own life. The contrast between different groups couldn't be more striking. The thief crucified beside Jesus, who had recognized him as Lord even in his dying moments, had passed into paradise as promised. The religious experts who had studied prophecies about the Messiah for decades had failed to recognize him, even as creation itself testified through darkness, earthquake, and torn veil. Roman soldiers who began the day carrying out routine executions ended it questioning everything they thought they knew. The centurion's confession, "Surely this man was the Son of God," represented a complete reversal from the mocking title nailed above Jesus' head, King of the Jews. The transition from darkness to light served as a powerful visual metaphor for what had been accomplished spiritually. For 3 hours, sin and its consequences had been concentrated on Jesus. The darkness symbolized judgment, separation, and death, all that sin produces. But with his declaration, "It is finished," that darkness was dispelled. What remained was light, the promise of reconciliation, forgiveness, and life. This pattern of darkness giving way to light wasn't coincidental but intentional, reflecting the grand narrative of God's redemptive work. From the beginning of creation, when light was called forth from darkness, to the Exodus, when Israel was led from slavery into freedom, God's salvation had always moved from darkness to light. Now on Golgotha, the ultimate liberation was being accomplished. The departure of darkness signified something profound, that sin's power had been broken. The spiritual forces that had celebrated as darkness now fled as light returned. What appeared to be defeat was revealed as the greatest victory in cosmic history. Death had been dealt a fatal blow by being allowed to swallow life itself, only to find it could not contain such a meal. What witnesses could not yet fully comprehend was that this was more than the end of a life. It was the pivot point of all history. The death of Jesus was not simply the execution of a controversial teacher, but the fulfillment of a divine rescue plan conceived before the foundation of the world. The cross represented the intersection of time and eternity, where infinite justice and infinite mercy met. The restoration of light revealed that Jesus' death was not merely a tragic conclusion, but a necessary transition. Just as a seed must fall into the ground and die before new life can emerge, his death was the essential precursor to resurrection. The darkness had not conquered the light, it had merely set the stage for light's most decisive victory. For those present, the return of physical light carried spiritual implications they were only beginning to grasp. Something had fundamentally changed in humanity's relationship with the divine. The barrier of sin that had separated humanity from God since Eden, symbolized by the temple curtain, had been removed. The way to God now stood open. The cosmic significance extended beyond earth to the spiritual realm. Powers and principalities that had operated in darkness found their authority suddenly curtailed. The ruler of this world whom Jesus had predicted would be driven out was now facing his decisive defeat. Though the full manifestation of victory awaited the resurrection, its foundation was laid as darkness retreated from Golgotha. As evening approached and the Sabbath drew near, Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple until now, found courage to approach Pilate and request Jesus' body for burial. What had been hidden in darkness was now emerging in light. Fear was giving way to boldness. The transition from darkness to light was already working its effect, transforming those who had witnessed it. The light that returned to Jerusalem that afternoon was more than the sun reclaiming its place in the sky. It was the first gleam of a new creation dawning, the initial ray of resurrection morning beginning to break through. Though most present could not yet see it, the darkness of Good Friday was already yielding to Easter's approaching light. Stepping into the light from ancient darkness to modern hope. Nearly 2,000 years have passed since darkness covered Jerusalem, yet the significance of those 3 hours continues to illuminate our world today. The darkness of Golgotha wasn't merely a historical anomaly, but a profound metaphor that speaks directly to our human condition. Each of us knows darkness in our own lives, not the physical absence of light, but the spiritual, emotional, and psychological shadows that sometimes engulf us. Consider Maria, a successful executive who seemed to have everything: career, family, respect. Yet behind closed doors, she battled a darkness few could see, crippling anxiety and feelings of inadequacy that no achievement could dispel. Her life exemplified what many experience: outward success masking inner turmoil. For years she navigated this personal darkness alone, believing no one could understand its depth. Then, during a particularly difficult season, a friend invited her to explore the meaning of Good Friday. As Maria learned about Jesus' experience of abandonment and darkness, something profound shifted within her. It wasn't just that he suffered, she would later explain, but that he willingly entered the darkness I was fighting. The God I thought was distant had actually experienced my pain. This realization that divine light had voluntarily stepped into human darkness became Maria's turning point. She didn't experience instant healing, but she found something perhaps more valuable: companionship in her suffering. Her darkness no longer meant abandonment. It became the very place where she encountered God's presence. Maria's story reflects a universal truth. The darkness of Golgotha transforms our own darkness. When Jesus entered humanity's deepest night, he forever changed what darkness means. No longer must darkness signify God's absence. Paradoxically, it can become the setting for his most profound work. This truth speaks powerfully to our modern context, where darkness takes many forms. For some, it's the crushing weight of depression that colors everything in shades of gray. For others, it's the darkness of betrayal or loss that extinguishes hope. Many face the darkness of addiction, trapped in cycles they cannot break alone. Still others confront the darkness of systemic injustice or persecution. The modern world offers many remedies for these darknesses: medication, therapy, self-improvement, social reform, and these have their place. But Good Friday addresses something deeper: the fundamental disconnection from God that underlies our human condition. The darkness that covered Jerusalem revealed that our greatest need isn't self-actualization, but reconciliation with our Creator. What makes the darkness of Good Friday so powerful is that it wasn't the end of the story, but the necessary prelude to Easter's light. The pattern of darkness then light established at Golgotha offers hope for every human experience of darkness. No matter how deep the shadow, light follows. This isn't shallow optimism, but a pattern woven into the very fabric of redemption. Consider James, a former inmate who spent 12 years in prison for crimes committed during his battle with addiction. "I knew what darkness was," he explains. "I lived in it physically in my cell and spiritually in my soul." During his incarceration, James encountered the story of Good Friday and was struck by Jesus' words to the thief crucified beside him. "Today you will be with me in paradise." That changed everything for me, James recalls. If Jesus could promise paradise to a criminal dying beside him, maybe there was hope for me too. Today, 8 years after his release, James leads a ministry helping others transition from incarceration to freedom. "I tell everyone that the darkness doesn't win. I know because I've lived it." The experiences of Maria and James demonstrate that the darkness to light pattern of Good Friday isn't just theological abstraction but a living reality. When Jesus bore our darkness, he transformed how we experience our own shadows. He didn't eliminate suffering from human experience, but he infused it with new meaning and possibility. This transformation occurs because of what happened on the cross. Jesus took upon himself the ultimate darkness, separation from God, so that we would never have to experience it. He entered abandonment so we could know acceptance. He embraced rejection so we could receive welcome. The darkness he endured means that, no matter how dark our circumstances, we are never truly alone or forsaken. The temple curtain torn from top to bottom symbolizes this new reality, the barrier between humanity and God, permanently removed. The darkness we experience can never separate us from divine love, because Jesus has already traversed the most profound separation possible. As Paul would later write, "I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God." This truth offers revolutionary hope in our age of anxiety and disconnection. Many people today move through life with a nagging sense of cosmic orphanhood, feeling untethered, unanchored, and ultimately alone in an indifferent universe. The darkness of Good Friday directly addresses this modern malaise by revealing a God who doesn't remain distant from our suffering, but enters fully into it. The implications are profound. If the divine light willingly entered our darkness, then darkness itself is transformed. No longer must we fear or flee our shadows. They can become the very places where we most deeply encounter God. Our suffering isn't meaningless, but can become, like Christ's suffering, redemptive and purposeful. This doesn't minimize the reality of pain or offer facile answers to complex suffering. Rather, it dignifies our darkness by revealing its potential as sacred ground. Just as the darkness over Jerusalem ultimately gave way to greater light, our personal and collective shadows can become the backdrop against which God's light shines most brilliantly. Today, you may find yourself in darkness, perhaps a darkness so deep you can't imagine light ever returning. You may feel abandoned, forsaken, or cast aside. The good news of Good Friday is that you are not alone in that darkness. The one who commanded light to shine out of darkness has himself walked through its depths. The one who hung on the cross crying, "Why have you forsaken me?" understands your feelings of abandonment. And just as the darkness over Jerusalem did not have the final word, neither does the darkness in your life. The same Jesus who endured the cross now invites you to trust him with your darkest moments. He doesn't promise immediate removal of all suffering, but he does promise his presence within it and ultimate redemption beyond it. The invitation of Good Friday is simple yet profound. Bring your darkness to the one who has already overcome the darkest forces of the universe. The light that dispersed the darkness over Jerusalem can disperse the darkness in your life as well. The God who did not spare his own son but gave him up for us all offers you the assurance that nothing, not even your deepest darkness, can separate you from his love. This is why, paradoxically, we call the day of Jesus' crucifixion Good Friday. What appeared to be history's darkest moment became the source of humanity's brightest hope. The darkness that covered the earth for those 3 hours revealed the depths of divine love, a love willing to experience abandonment so that we never would. As we remember the darkness of Golgotha, we are invited to step out of our own shadows and into the light of God's redemptive love. The journey from darkness to light isn't always instantaneous. Often it's a process of dawn slowly breaking. But the promise remains. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Will you step into that light today? In the depths of life's most challenging moments, we often find ourselves enveloped in our own personal darkness. At midlife and beyond, these shadows can feel particularly heavy. Career setbacks, health diagnoses, relationships fracturing, children growing distant, or the growing awareness of our own mortality. These midday darknesses can make us feel utterly alone. The profound message of Good Friday speaks directly to these experiences. The darkness that covered Jerusalem wasn't just an ancient historical event. It was the moment when divine light deliberately entered human darkness. When Jesus cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" he validated every feeling of abandonment we've ever experienced. What transforms this story from mere history to living hope is the pattern it establishes. Darkness is never the end of the story. In our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, we've lived long enough to know that life doesn't always provide happy endings. Some prayers seem unanswered. Some wounds never fully heal. Yet Good Friday whispers a revolutionary truth. Our darkest moments can become sacred ground where transformation begins. The same God who experienced abandonment promises we will never be truly forsaken. The same power that tore the temple curtain can break down the barriers in our lives. The same light that eventually dispersed the darkness over Golgotha can illuminate our path forward. Whatever darkness you're facing today, whether it's regret over paths not taken, worry about the future, or grief over what's been lost, remember that you never walk through these shadows alone. The one who endured the ultimate darkness walks beside you, and ahead of you lies the promise of resurrection light. Did this exploration of Good Friday's darkness touch something in your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How does the story of Jesus' sacrifice speak to your own journey through darkness and light? If you found value in this message, please consider subscribing to our channel for more biblical insights that connect ancient wisdom with modern life. New videos are released every week exploring the depths of Scripture and its relevance today. Don't keep this message to yourself. Share it with someone who might be walking through their own darkness right now. Sometimes the right message at the right moment can be exactly what someone needs. And if you appreciated this video, taking a moment to like it helps us reach more people with these timeless truths. Thank you for being part of this community of seekers and believers.